Why didn't I just walk away? That's what this defendant said to the police the night that she stabbed her husband, Lucy Medina, without justification, causing him serious bodily injury. She stabbed him with a knife that she decided to grab from the kitchen. She then went outside, stabbed him in the neck, rather than just walking away. In July of 2020, Lucy and Lucy Medina had been together for about 20 years. They got married in 2001. They were living together in Lawrence. They both had children from previous marriages. They were together for a long time. And in July of 2020, I think we all remember, during the height of COVID, being cooped up in our houses, having nothing to do, and trying to find things to do in July of 2020 during the height of the pandemic. And one thing that Luis and Lucy did on July 17th, 2020 is drink alcohol. They were outside, out on their patio. It's a Friday night. They're sitting on their patio behind their apartment, hanging out, something that they regularly did. They're drinking beers, tequila shots. An argument starts. An argument starts, you'll hear from an interview with the defendant about their children. An argument that started between two people that had known each other, been together for over 20 years, fueled by alcohol, as well as the family issues that was the source of their argument. You're going to hear, as I said, that Miss Medina was drinking beers. That night, before she stabbed Mr. Medina, she had more than 5 beers, along with tequila shots. And you may very well hear that Luis was physical with the defendant on this occasion, that he hit her. You very well may hear evidence of that. And of course, the defendant is allowed to take reasonable measures to defend herself if she's being attacked. Nobody's questioning that. But what I ask you to keep in mind throughout the course of this trial, what I would suggest is an extremely important thing to remember, is that whenever somebody, like in this case, takes a knife and stabs somebody, they have to have proper justification. And they cannot do what is more than reasonably necessary in the moment. The court, Judge Frazier, at the end of this trial, will give you full instructions on self-defense, and I don't want to substitute for that. But I ask you to keep in mind, when you hear the evidence, when you listen to Ms. Medina's interview, when you see photographs, when you hear about Mr. Medina's injuries, that's what I ask you to consider. Did she take reasonable steps to leave the argument? And did she have justification? I suggest to you that that this evidence during this trial will show that she did not. She made a choice to go in the kitchen, grab a knife, and stab him in the neck. Well, Lewis is still standing outside in the midst of that argument, out on the patio, drinking beers, drinking tequila. This defendant makes a decision. She goes through the back door into her apartment, a basement apartment in the building where they were living, down the stairs into the kitchen. She opens a silverware drawer. She grabs a sharp knife out of that silverware drawer. She goes back outside. She goes back to the argument. She stabs him in the neck. And you're going to hear that she felt terribly about stabbing him. You're going to hear that she called 911, that she was trying to help him, that you're going to hear that she's distraught, extremely upset on those 911 calls. Again, no one is disputing that she was upset about what she did to Mr. Medina. But that does not change the fact that she did not have justification for stabbing him in the neck. You're going to hear from the investigation that took place after the stabbing that first responders, police, crime scene technicians arrived at the scene in order to collect evidence and just find out exactly what happened. There were attempts to talk to neighbors to see if there were any witnesses since it happened outside. There were no witnesses to this other than Mr. and Mrs. Medina. No one saw what happened. No one observed any of the argument. Again, the only people who could tell us exactly what happened is Mr. Medina and, of course, Miss Medina herself, which you will see in the recorded interview that she gave with the police the night of this incident. And as I said, you're going to see pictures of the scene. The amount of blood that was coming from Lewis's neck, the blood trails from the patio, through the door, through the hallway into the kitchen. You're going to see blood on the faucet in the kitchen, blood on the cabinets. And this blood was from this serious injury that Miss Medina inflicted on Mr. Medina without justification by stabbing him in the neck when she could have just walked away by her own admission. They, of course, tried to interview Luis to get his side that night. He was seriously injured. He was in surgery. They were not able to get his story. And you may very well hear during this trial that they were unable to get his story at all. And you may not hear from Luis Medina during this trial. But again, if that's the case, I'd ask you to consider, notwithstanding not hearing his full side of the story, the circumstances, the blood at the scene, the chaotic nature of the scene, the defendant's statements, the fact that there was one knife, one deadly weapon found, or ever even alluded to, that kitchen knife, that sharp knife that was found on the ground on the patio after the defendant stabbed Mr. Medina. You're not going to hear about any other deadly weapons or anything like that. And based on Lewis's injuries, the condition of the scene, the weapon, all of the circumstances, the statements the defendant gives that very night, you're going to see that the evidence shows again that she stabbed him without justification. She did not take reasonable measures to leave the situation by her own admission. And as I've stated, you're going to see her interview. And you're going to see how distraught she is. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's denying that she was upset after she stabbed him. But two things can be true. She can be upset for what she did, and what she did was still wrong. And again, no one's disputing. She can take reasonable steps to defend herself, but leaving the argument, going into the kitchen, opening that silverware drawer, grabbing the knife, going back outside, connecting with him and stabbing him was completely without justification. And I'll ask you again, and I ask that you consider throughout the trial as you hear this evidence, why didn't she just walk away? And at the end of this trial, I'll have the opportunity to address you again, and I'll ask for a verdict of guilty on the charges. Thank you.
He beat her. He beat her up. He beat her down. He beat her into subservience. Not just that night. He beat her constantly. Not just a week before, not a month before, not a year before. beat her for 28 years. He beat her. And he did it constantly. He did it proudly. And he did it until she couldn't fight back. That night started well before that evening. It was 28 years in the making. It was an investment by her husband of power, control, and dominance. He took from her, he robbed from her dignity, her self-respect, her ability to protect herself. That's what this case is about. And she had a right. She had a right that night to say no. Stop. No more. Because she could never speak up or defend herself. It would only get worse. 28 years. This was no different. The punches to the face that night, the battering of her body, it was no different than almost every other weekend in her adult life. You will see injuries and bruises. The next day. This wasn't something that was unique or just that night. This is how she lived. The government is asking you to convict her for defending herself. The thing is, they actually don't know what happened that night. They don't know. They interviewed her, and you're going to get a chance, the benefit of seeing her interaction with the police, partially catatonic through it, how distraught she is, and you'll see the bruises that are starting to form. Why? Why? He beats me. He beats me. And you'll hear her tell the police that she got a knife because he wanted her to stop. You're not going to hear her say that she walked up to him and stabbed him. That's a creation of the government. She had a knife to say no more. And we have no idea, they have no idea. They will have no evidence of proof to say she stabbed him. Did he try to take the knife away from her? Was she on the ground holding it to protect herself? Is that how she had the marks and the cuts and the bruises? They don't know. So they just skip to, she stabbed him. They don't have an expert who's going to come in and talk about the wound and say whether it was from an angle, or she was on the ground, or they were fighting over the knife, or he had grabbed it. But what they do have, that they didn't tell you, is in the medical records when the personnel asked, how did this wound happen? He said, I did it to myself. I did it to myself. So the government is not going to be able to give you any evidence of how this happened. And one thing that really stands out, they're going to make no effort to tell you why it happened. They don't go and speak to coworkers and ask them if those bruises were every month or every weekend for 28 years. They don't get a doctor to evaluate the information or evidence. They don't ask follow-up questions about all the marks and bruises. They just charge her with the crime. And so, although an accused, presumed innocent, has no burden of proof, we don't have to prove anything. They can't prove it, we don't have to prove anything. But we're going to provide evidence to you. Attorney Gina Simonelli Baxter and I are going to take you back through the history of Miss Medina, and she's going to have to suffer through this for the next few days, because she must. And we're going to tell you about what led to her state of mind that night when she needed to defend herself, because you can only understand it if you understand the history. And they are not going to do that for you. They didn't even try. So we have to go back to before Lucy met her husband, Lucy Medina. You'll hear from friends of hers, she was outgoing, charismatic, happy. And then things changed. Before I tell you about her meeting Lucy Medina, her husband, let me tell you a little bit about Lucy Medina before he met Lucy Medina. He was dating another woman, had a child, and guess what? He beat her. It wasn't just Lucy, he beat her. And she escaped. That woman, right before Lucy, escaped. And then enter Lucy. She didn't know. But she was going to soon find out. 5 months into their dating, just 5 months, it began. He took her one night to his mother's house in a back room and shut the door, fueled by alcohol, and he beat her. I don't mean he slapped her. I don't mean that he pushed her. He beat her. Her face covered in bruises, her body, the welts, out of nowhere. She had no idea. She wouldn't leave the room for days. Not because she was angry. She was embarrassed. She was humiliated. She wondered what she had done wrong to him. And so she stayed until the wounds began to heal. This would become a routine in her entire adult life. After that 5 months, it continued. They got married. They moved into a home. And he beat her. You're going to hear from witnesses that the government knows about, but they would never will call them. People that work with Lucy Medina, people that knew her over a period of 28 years. And they will tell you, when you hear from them, about the black eyes, and the bruises, and the scratches, and the long periods of time that Lucy didn't come to work. And when she'd come to work, the shawls over her body, the hiding of her face, the makeup. And when she was asked, it was always the same. Lucy, what happened? She fell down the stairs. She fell out of bed. She walked into a cabinet, slipped on the ice. Over the next 20 years, Lucy Medina would fall down a lot. A lot. And if anybody ever tried to speak to Lucy, she would be guarded and protective. Back at home, it wasn't just physical, psychological. Her hands cramped. Every morning, fresh oranges, freshly squeezed orange juice, every day. Every day. And get it right, or do it again. And so, over that period of time, Lucy Medina, psychologically, changed. One moment. She changed. And over those years, she was damaged. You're going to hear from an expert witness, Dr. Zeisel, an absolute expert in psychology, has studied battered woman syndrome, has studied PTSD, has dealt with hundreds of cases, and you're going to have an opportunity to hear from him. And he's going to talk about the psychological effect of the physical and emotional beatings over periods of years. And he had a chance to evaluate not only the facts in this case, he had a chance to listen to the witnesses who will attest to what they saw over that 28 years. He's going to share with you the unfortunate culmination of this damage, PTSD, anxiety disorder. He will talk about what a battered woman is. And a battered woman is Lucy Medina. And he will share with you how this abuse over a long period of time deteriorates someone's psychology. The fear, the panic, it's not if she's going to get beaten again. It's when. How bad? And that night, you can tell from those pictures, she was in the middle of a beating. And they're gonna try to tell you, walk away. You don't walk away from those types of injuries. You don't. She couldn't. And so inevitably, you are going to learn, when you consider self-defense, what the frailness and psychology of Lucy Medina was at the time she said, stop. But you'll still never know what actually happened because they don't have a witness. You're not going to hear. You're maybe not going to hear from Lucy Medina. You're not going to hear from her. I'll tell you that right now. But you are going to hear from somebody, a very important witness, and that is Lucy Medina's attorney. His name is Attorney Marat Erkan, represents Lucy Medina. We're going to call him as a witness because in 2021, Attorney Erkan wrote a letter on behalf of his client, Lucy Medina. And that letter was submitted to the government explaining that Lucy Medina has a long-time affliction with alcohol, and he admits that he beats Lucy Medina. He admits about this long-standing battering of his wife. So you're not going to hear from him, but you're going to hear from his attorney. It's not Lucy Medina saying this because it was a bad night. This is a lifetime of abuse. And inevitably, at the end of this case, you're going to learn that this was not a night of violence for Lucy Medina. This was a night of survival. And she had a right. And we're going to ask you at the end of this case to acquit Lucy Medina. Thank you.
Can we approach briefly?
Yes.